Oya, 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 oya. Wacha tuingie daru leo. Unajua ni aje? Leo tunaenda kuongelea kitu inaitwa pharmacology. Pharmacology. It's one of the units that zinakuwa covered na medical students. Kuna watu wanafanya vitu kama health records, can also handle the med part. That's pharmacology. So leo tutakuwa tunaenda kupiga pharmacology in a precise way and in layman's language yenye kila msanii anaweza understand mse. Ni kitu naweza ambia even mama mboga na kupate. Pharmacology. Now, what is pharmacology? In simple terms, we'll say that pharmacology is actually the study of drugs and how they interact with the living cells, or just the body. This it entails the study of drugs and how these drugs interact with the human body. So anytime we talk about the human body, manze, tuko tunaongelea hapa the living cells za mtu. Sawa? Yeah. Now, if we have to define the word pharmacology as the study of drugs and how they interact with the human body, then we also ought to understand what are now the drugs. So we'll say that a drug is a chemical substance that when used, it alters the way the body functions. Now note this, when we say that the body is functioning in a certain way, and when you take a drug, that drug will change the way this body will work. Now the body can actually change from the normality to the abnormal part of functioning. In anatomy, we say that the normal functioning of the body is actually called the physiology. So you might be in a physiological way of functioning in terms of your own body, and when now you take any drug, it alters the way your body has been functioning well to a different thing, which is unwell now. You understand? For instance, can we take now the example of msaki tumia kitu kama pombe? It's also an alcohol, ama let's say a different drug, maybe the nicotine, whatever hizo vitu zote. Unaona msaki chukua kitu kama ya meze, unaona anaanza kustaga. So body ijazoea kustaga. Unapata msana anakaa ni kama anapimia, ni kama anaangalia chini kama inatroboka ama hapana, vitu kama hizo unageta. Inakuanga ni ashatumia something else which is now altering the way the body should be functioning. And at the same time, unaweza kuwa mgonjwa to an extent of unashindwa kujipata vizuri. For example, now you are so sick to an extent of now your own body imeanza kuchukua ile form ya sickness kwa its own normality. So ukichukua tena drugs, getting it back to your normal state, then it will now also the altering of the body. You understand? Those are now drugs. Now, when we're talking about pharmacology, there's several definitions or terms which you ought to know for you to hack every other thing to do with pharmacology. They are very, very important. Now, this I term them to be only 7 of them. One of them is actually what we call the affinity, and the second one is what we call the receptor. There's a receptor, there is efficacy, there is agonism, there is an antagonism, and there is pharmacokinetic and pharmacodynamic. These are the definition that we are going to cover them for only today. Follow me keenly. Msee nifuate fiti. Hii itakusaidia place. Very, very layman's language in terms of teaching. Na hii utaipata na itakusaidia uko mbele. You miss on this kind of definitions, itafika hapo mbele utakuwa na hata. Lakini ukishaipata itakuwa fiti. Unasonga nayo pole pole. Ewinja. Thank you. Umenipata. Okay. Now can we start with the affinity? When we define affinity, we'll be defining it in a way that we will be saying affinity, it is the ability of a drug to bind onto a receptor. It is the ability of a drug to bind onto a receptor. Now, when we define affinity as the ability to bind onto a receptor, it leads us to understand more of what is a receptor. But then before we go to a receptor, we all ought to understand that as we are saying that it's the ability of this drug to bind onto a receptor, a human's body has got cells. And now these drugs, before they function in someone's body, they have to interact with what we call now the body. Now this body is actually the cells that we are talking about. They must go through the cells before they reach the entire body. I hope you still understand and you note down that we're having cells to come up with tissues, to come up with organs, to come up with organ systems, then to come up with the entire body. So for any drug to function in your own body, it must start from the aspect of we are talking about the cell. So it has to start with the cell. That's why in anatomy now we define the cell as the basic functional unit, because nothing can enter your body minus your own cells to permit them. It must be permitted by your own cells. Now when we say that a drug, the ability of a drug to bind onto a receptor, it's because this receptor is something that is actually on the surface of the cell and even in the inside of that cell. And so definition of affinity leads us to define also another definition, which is the second one, we're calling the receptor. So we'll define a receptor as this is the protein molecule found on the surface of the cell, and at the same time it's also found inside of that cell. Do you understand? It is the one that accepts this drug. It entertains the drug or even any other form of material that comes in your own body. It must accept it. You understand? Great. Now we go now further to talk about the efficacy. Initially, we have talked about the affinity. This drug is actually trying to bind onto a receptor. The word binding, it's like making friendship in layman's language. It's like making friendship. You know, you go at a place where you are like, I don't have another person, but now we need to at least to be gelling together with these people. You understand? So ikifika hiyo place manze, inakuwa ni rahisi sana kama ushaunda urafiki na wase ndio uingiliane. So when it comes to the efficacy part, we'll say that efficacy is now the ability of this drug to produce a pharmacological effect. Follow me keenly. This efficacy, if we have to define it, we will say that it is the ability of the drug now not to bind onto a receptor, but to produce a pharmacological effect. Unaget? To produce a pharmacological effect. That means there's a way unezoka meza dawa ikuwe na affinity only to bind onto a receptor, but towards the end of the day, this drug will not be functional in your body. That means it lacked the ability to produce the pharmacological effect in your own body. So you didn't have you didn't have efficacy. From efficacy, we jump to a different also definition, a different term, which now we'll have to call it the agonism. Agonism now, agonism or agonist, either of it is still the same thing, agonist or agonism. Now the agonist has got both the affinity and the efficacy. Listen to me keenly. When we talk about the agonist, it carries both the affinity and it carries also the efficacy. That means agonist will be defined as something that is having the ability of binding onto a receptor, and at the same time it has the ability to produce a pharmacological effect. You understand? Do you understand? That is agonist. When we journey to what we call now the antagonist, you realize this, that when we talk about the word and, the phrase and means against. So you're talking about the agonist, and you realize that when we talk about the affinity, it has bound, in other words, has made the friendship with your own body or your own cells. Now it needs to produce pharmacological effects so that you can be healed or cured. You understand? Good. So inamaanisha, if only that drug has got the ability to bind onto a receptor, but it doesn't have the ability to produce the pharmacological effect, that means you will not be cured. The healing part comes, or the curing part comes from the efficacy now, which produces the pharmacological effect in your own body. Listen to me. Now the agonist has got both of them. So that means 1, it will bind onto a receptor. 2, it will produce a pharmacological effect. You get me right? Great. Antagonist, it's against agonism or agonist. And agonist, it's against agonist. Now listen to me very keenly. Agonist has got both of them. And antagonist has got only one thing, which is the binding of the receptor. The binding ability, but no production of effect. So it has only affinity, but not efficacy. So an agonist will be fighting the agonist to obtain or to get what we're saying, the efficacy. Because efficacy is now the key or the SI unit now to this equation. Now, antagonist is actually fighting the agonist to get the efficacy to itself. Now, when efficacy is used by agonist, you'll be healed or you'll be cured. When the same efficacy is used by the antagonist, your curing part or process will be prolonged. You can even die. You understand? Unaniget? Haya fiti. Ni sawa na kusema tuko na kitu, acha tuchukue hiyo efficacy to be something like now let's take the efficacy part to be like the knife. Any knife found by mama mboga kwa kibanda atakukatia katia mboga uende ukule hiyo mboga na ugali maybe or whatever, you'll be okay. You understand? The same knife ipatikane na aroba. Aroba will kill you to get short of your own life and you are normal. So here aroba ndio kama antagonist. Mama mboga hapa ni huyo agonist. Antagonist against agonist. To make sure that you continue being sick. That's the work of the antagonist. It doesn't have the ability to bind onto a receptor, but it has only the ability. I mean, it doesn't have the ability to produce a pharmacological effect because it doesn't have the efficacy. But it has the ability only to bind onto a receptor because it has the affinity only. You get me well? Thank you. Yeah. From which we'll have to go straight to what now we call pharmacodynamic. Pharmacodynamic. Pharmacodynamic in layman's language and in local language and in the simplest mother tongue language. Pharmacodynamic is what the drug does to your body. It's what the drug does to your body. When you swallow drugs or when you take these drugs inside your own system, whatever they are coming to do in your system, we say that is pharmacodynamic. And now we realize that we'll be talking about 4 things under pharmacodynamic, which now we'll cover it in our next topic, or not in our next topic, in our next class. You get me? In our next class. You realize that they have 4 things which we'll have to discuss when it comes to our next lesson of pharmacology. We are just on the introduction of pharmacology. We have only picked several definitions which will be vital for you to understand, of which now we have, of course, we have some other definitions zenye tutakuwa tunaziongelea kidogo hapa na pale. Understand? So pharmacodynamic, it's what the drug does to your body. Now, the last one, which it might not mark the last one for every other person. It marks the last one for me or to me, to make sure that I grasp every other thing, because every other pharmacology, every other things that we'll be studying in pharmacology will still be revolving around the things we have discussed today or the terms we have defined today. So the last one is pharmacokinetic. That one was pharmacodynamic. Now we're talking about the pharmacokinetic. Pharmacokinetic. In layman's language, now pharmacokinetic. You know, in pharmacodynamic we said that it is what the drug does to your body. Pharmacodynamic. In pharmacokinetic, it's now the other way around. Pharmacokinetic is now what the body does to that drug. The drug has actually maneuvered itself through you swallowing it into your own system or into your body. Whatever it came to do, it was pharmacodynamic. But now you as a person or you as the body, whatever you're going to do to that drug, it's now called pharmacokinetic. One of the processes of pharmacokinetic is the absorption, it is the distribution, it is the metabolism, it is the excretion. Four things also. In pharmacodynamic, we have four things which we will have to talk about in our next class. The same next class will have to also handle the what? There are also other four things in pharmacokinetic. So in our next class, we'll have to start with pharmacodynamic. After we have done, we go to what we call the pharmacokinetic. You understand? Good. I will have to separate these classes to make sure that we all understand. Every other student who comes on board must understand. If it is very, very simple, we have to break them down. I know very well that I have taken only a different path of introduction of this, but now we have not talked about, we have not maybe defined things to do with what's a clinic, what's a laboratory, vitu kama hizo. We'll have to come and also talk about them. We have even not talked about the sources of drugs. We have not talked about the route of administration of drugs. We have not talked about those things. Now we'll have to compile them in our next class or in a different way. You understand? Otherwise, let us get to the next class. Don't hesitate. Click that link, manzi. Subscribe. Pharmacology.